Alright, economics video, I guess. Probably on the economics channel. Just, people don't really like this stuff. And I'm going to go over stuff that I've already gone over before just because I think it's, I don't know, I feel like giving it another try. I have an idea that I have a better idea of how to explain it, but who knows. Modern Mystics made 3 videos called Font or something, and some kind of crap about money supply raining up and rains back down, and the end is somehow it all makes sense and it all works out and it's all okay and blah blah blah. And I didn't see any value in that whatsoever. In the metaphor, I would argue that money is created by debt, and we're using the value of some promise of something, and it's all promises of future value. Like you could almost argue that there's probably a piece of paper somewhere that accounts for the profit from some business that hasn't even been created yet, and they've already sold the profits to that business ahead of time and turned it into something monetized, and that's counted as money now because it's been monetized. It's another thing. It's just money to create incentives for people to do something. And the problem is that when you make those and those things don't happen, that money, it doesn't occur, doesn't get created, that value doesn't get created, that stuff doesn't get created, then some of those slips of paper have to be dissolved into nothing, and so somebody's wealth has to be destroyed. So the consequence is if you oversell something, you sell too many pieces, it's sort of like that producer's thing where in essence what you're saying is that you're going to oversell a pie. And as long as most of the people get lost on their way to the pie store, it's okay. But if all the people show up at the pie store, you're in big trouble because you don't have enough pie. So it's that kind of thing. We've oversold the productivity of the human race, and the value that's being used as wealth is not really value. It's just a piece of paper that says stuff on it, but if it ever has to be cashed, it won't be cashable. It'll never be converted into money. It'll never be converted into cash. And that's where cash comes in again. So let's do the cash thing again. So I'm gonna establish. Let's do the drawing thing. So let's just create some sort of outline of the machinery. So we'll say the Fed is here, and this is just where the transactions take place, in the sense that the funny money comes in, it gets converted into cash, the exchanges are made. And then you have the IOU machine, and this IOU machine is a bank, but it could be anything. You got to put the O in there, Gary. So, or bank, or whatever you want to call it. This is the place where not real money is made, but this digital money and fake money. So let's go, the system originally, what would happen is somebody would take their stuff, probably gold, let's say, and the government says, you bring us as your gold, we'll give you dollar bills. So dollar bills we'll make as a square with a dollar sign on it, and IOUs we'll make as a circle. Well, I'll get to that. Yeah, so let's say these are dollar bills. So dollar bills go out, and these have to come back in as taxes. So the trick is that the government taxes have to be paid in dollar bills. Okay, so people need to get dollars so they can pay the taxes. So that's something to understand, is that this is why money is valuable. One of the reasons why dollar bills are valuable is because you have to pay taxes in dollars. Something that can be demonetized easily into dollars. And certainly is going to be by the Fed. Okay, so I already broke the Fed because I did this gold thing. So let's just say that this is not the Fed. This is the original bank that creates money, the printing press or something. And we'll just make the Fed down here. So this will be the Fed. Alright, the reserve accounts. So let's understand. So what basically takes place is the gold comes in, money, dollar bills come out. So there's always been value behind the dollar. So basically what the government said is that if you're going to create a money system, what you would say is, okay, everybody has to agree that you pay workers in cash, and cash is worth this much gold. So you establish that deal. And you say, anytime you come to us and bring gold, we'll give you cash. So the employers take their profits to the government, say, give them the gold, and they get the cash, so now they can pay the employees in the cash money. And that's how the money first gets into circulation. And then they can pay that percentage back to the government to pay taxes. And you know, the money is valuable because it's good for paying taxes, and anytime you take it to this government bank, Gov Bank we'll call it, you'll get gold in return. So it's a sensible mechanism, and the government controls how many of these things it prints. So we do know that right now there's only 1.2 trillion of these things. Alright, so that'll be for reference later. So it controls how many of these things are in circulation by taking them in through not only taxation, but also taking them in through the Fed. So now we'll go to the Fed. Now what the Fed does is just establishes another system, okay, which is really just going to say, alright, let's get to the IOUs. Okay, so banks can create fake money. So what they can basically say is, you come in and give us some kind of promise, some kind of deed, some kind of something, and we'll give you what is just like money. Okay, we'll give you something just like money, which is one of our checks, which any other bank will cash, or now in the modern day, a digit. So let's understand that originally what took place was, you would come in and the bank would give you a check, a physical check for the money. You'd get a loan and they'd give you a bank check for the money, or they'd give you actual cash. Now, Nick thinks it's somehow different now because digits change something. Well, digits don't change anything except they change the check from paper into a digit. But it's still the same exact thing. It's still just a bank check, bank digits. The digits all have a bank address on them, and that's where the Fed comes in terms of transacting those checks. So anyway, so I'm just saying these checks are the IOUs. So the IOUs will be a circle. And so it's just basically IOU money. So they're giving you an IOU. You're basically signing up for an IOU. You're the one now has the debt, and the IOU is in the form of a bank's check. It's good for cash. It's good as long as you'll pay the debt. It's a promise on whatever value you put in the bank. So if it's a collateralized loan versus an uncollateralized, just lose uncollateralized for the purpose of making this more interesting. But the point is banks can get value, and that value can be worth something or not worth anything. For example, I could give the bank 2 pounds of gold as collateral for a loan, and then the gold prices crash. Now the collateral doesn't cover the loan anymore, and if I default on the loan, the bank doesn't have the value of the loan, it loses money. With an uncollateralized loan, we can see quite obviously if I don't pay the debt, the bank will lose the money because it put a check out that was as good as cash. And I'll explain how the check ends up in the Fed. So anyway, this is how the deal would work is you bring some stuff, so we'll do stuff as a triangle, like a pyramid. And the stuff can be a promise, like I'll do work in the future, or the stuff can be the deed to your house, or the deed to your car, or some other kind of thing, and you get the check out. So the bank will take your stuff, your promise, it gives you a check, okay, made out to it, and you can take that check to any bank to deposit it to get something done, or you can give it to somebody else because they're going to say it's good. You can just sign the back and endorse it, and they know that it's good. So it's money, but it's just money that's in a different form. But you can't pay your taxes with it. So you do have to get it cashed before you can use it for certain things that still require more solid money. So anyway, what happens is these checks go into the economy. So this is what Nick's saying about the money supply. So these checks that banks write, okay, there ends up being a lot of these things, right? These IOU money created by promises. And so they're out there in the economy floating around just like real dollars. So there's real dollars floating around with IOU dollars, and they're interchangeable. Cash or digit, it doesn't matter. So recognize that these checks are now digits, but it doesn't matter. The digits are the same as checks in the sense they're signed by a bank. Okay, they have a signature on them of the person who has to pay. And the way the payment happens, as I have explained before, but let's do it again, is that the Fed basically says, I will make these checks real. Okay, so they have to come down to the Fed. The Fed says, there's different banks, and they all have, each bank has an account with the Fed. So we have A, B, and C again. We'll just do that. And the different banks all have this account, and they all have an amount in their account, and the amounts in cash. So the banks had to take actual cash and deposit it into the Fed. So this was all made out of real cash. Real money had to go into these accounts. And that's the only thing that can go in and out is money. It can't, and nothing else does. And so what happens is that what's found out is the Fed says every day to the bank, well, how many checks, for each bank, let's just have a little register of what checks went out, right? So the out checks and the in checks, that's all. And so each bank has a daily accounting of how many checks did it push out and how many checks did it take in. And that is registered here from who the check is signed by. So if a particular bank has 10 checks from Bank A and 1 check for Bank B, and then Bank B has 10 checks from Bank C, and you know what I'm saying? They just exchange the real value of them. They're converted into real money, real obligation, and their accounts have to account for the differences. So Bank B might have a lot of reserves, but on this particular day, Bank C has a whole bunch of its checks that it wants cashed. And so the money comes out of its reserve account, so this number goes down, and Bank C's reserves go up because the money here is transferred to C. So the money is transferred between these accounts. Now the trick is that these accounts, if they go low enough, then the bank has to put more money in. They're not like it's perfectly fluid. So each bank is still required to keep money in that account. It can't go to zero. It has to keep the account full. And so when it has a lot of checks out, it has to put cash in the reserve account to compensate for those checks that went out. And it's just a practical fact, that the accounting has to be done, and cash will have to come in. Likewise, when the bank has a lot of reserves, way too much, it just asks the Fed to give it the cash, and it takes the cash out of the account for its use. Maybe in the future of putting the cash back in again when it's low, but obviously it can use cash in its transactions, and it doesn't have to go to the Fed to cash a check. It can provide actual cash to somebody who comes into the bank, gives them a check, and they will give them actual cash, and the obligation is completed. Except they'll be getting the cash back when they go in here. So they take the check from you, right? You have a check. You go to the bank takes in the check, gives you actual cash, and then the check goes to the Federal Reserve, and this bank will get more reserves from the bank the check is from. So you see that the cash part is always part of the game. It's always converted into cash here in the Fed. So the Fed makes this stuff real, in terms of it turns it into real money for a second or two. Not for very long, but it's definitely turned into real money for a moment in time, to be transacted and to affect these reserve accounts. So there is a certain this is like I said, these checks, these digits the bank have are related to the amount of cash in the economy. So there can't be more digits than there is cash to account for them, in a sense. It's not the right way to say it. Yeah, well, in a way it is. And so that's the limitation. So the only way you can create more money, real money supply, is that you have to create more stuff. You have to create more, like other paper, like a stock, or a bond, or some other kind of paper that that you can have represented as digits for a moment. So again, it's all about time, how long something is something. So checks are only cash for a moment, and stocks are only checks for a moment, and each one is only transitions through some other medium. But as you get further and further away from cash, the quality of the digit gets weaker and weaker. So the quality of the cash is rock solid. There's only 1.2 trillion of those. Now there's a certain number of digits floating around that get equalized out, but there's a limitation to how many of those digits can exist. And so the digits get converted into these stocks or bonds or some other document, some other deed to a business, some other thing, some other kind of paper, some other promissory note that isn't like just an electronic digit anymore. It's a thing. Let's see how to say that. It's a thing that's it's like, say the banks can make a deal with each other that's not really going to go to the Fed. It's not really on the books. And so that's sort of where most of these digits are existing, is in some kind of limbo, because they're not going to be cashed out. So the bank basically says, well, here, I'll give you a deed, I'll give you a stock, I'll give you something else, and you give me something that you have that's valuable. But they don't have to exchange exactly digits. And they can say, don't cash the check. What they can basically do is write an IOU, not really a regular check, but a check that's going to go in the background, or the back door kind of check, underground check. And it's not really a real digit. Okay, it's not real. It's kind of fake in the sense that they just agree, don't cash the check. I'll give it to you, you can have possession of it, these digits, but you never cash the digits, okay? Because I'm going to buy them back from you in the future or something. So they just kind of make a deal. Don't ever cash the check, because I don't have the money in the reserve account, I don't have the money in the vault, don't cash the check. So they just make a deal and say, look, the check is good, you know I'm good for it, but don't cash it. Okay, it's backed up by stock, or it's backed up by some collateral, they'll say, some kind of piece of paper, some kind of promise, and the paper says right on it, the promise is good, if I have the stock it's yours, blah blah blah. So it's a guaranteed kind of contract, but it's a contract that'll never get resolved in the Fed. And so a ton of this money stuff gets converted into that kind of wealth. So, but this is, like I stated, it's getting further and further now from real cash. So now these notes are getting more and more ambiguous in terms of how much is it really worth. So, like a U.S. bond, it says on it it's good for this amount of money, but if everybody tried to cash those bonds tomorrow, there's no way it's worth anything. There's no way we could pay it, right? I mean, $1 trillion is what, $10,000 per working person? If there was 100 million working people, well, somebody do the math, right? Right. I mean, no. So if there's 100 million people working, to get to $1 trillion, you have to add 1, 2, 3, 4 digits, right? I think so. So yeah, it's $10,000 per working person, just for $1 trillion. So it's not an insignificant amount of money, and it's an incredibly significant amount of money, $1 trillion. And we have $17 trillion worth of debt. So you can say that that's 10,000 times 17, or $170,000 or something like that. And that's just the bond note debt. The future obligations and other ways make these numbers much higher. The other pieces of paper that are obligations that no one's going to allow to be transacted because nobody has the money to cover the obligation. All right. Yeah, I wanted to get the real flow of this idea that this crap goes out and gets turned into an incentive to do work. Because that's the real important part here, is that how does this create energy in the economy, and that's where this there's just too much noise in here for me to get to that part. But I mean, that's the other element here. Is here's the worker, and he can't work two jobs, so to speak. He's going to have to do one thing or another thing or another thing. So you can only get so much value out of people in terms of their productivity. But you want them to be working, but only half the people, let's say, are working that could be working because of the system we have. But anyway, the point is that that's what these digits do, is you can put them in front of these workers as incentives for the worker to work. So you could almost draw the worker as a Pac-Man, and he will gobble up money you put in front of him and do work. And when he works, he shits out this thing called productivity, right? So he's making value. He makes value by working. And you can incentivize him to work by putting these digits in front of him, these checks or this thing that represents money. Because he wants the money, because the money buys stuff, and he wants stuff. So that's sort of understandable. So the amount of digits you have will be able to create more incentive to do work, right? I mean, that sort of makes sense. But we got to understand that the amount of digits is really controlled by how much money actually exists. And it really is limited by what workers can't do everything. And you want to pay them as little as possible to gain as much profit if you're trying to profit off the worker. So if you're selling his value, so that the owners sell the value of the worker to gain more claims on checks, more claims on digits, more claims on cash. Because the value is now a value. Value can be exchanged, like before, for money. If you put value in, you get money out. That's the promise of the system, the money system. But the workers can only do one thing at a time, so it's all up to these people who own the digits, who possess the digits. They get to decide which way the worker works. What the worker does, whether he's doing like infrastructure and good stuff and whatever, or he's wasting his time making Lamborghinis or polishing marble bathrooms or whatever the thing would be. There's different value that he can be doing. He can be curing diseases, or he can be doing paperwork. He can be doing some lawyer crap, some lawyer scheme, suing somebody and extorting money from them, basically saying, if you don't give us money, we're going to drag you into court and you'll spend 5 years, and waste a ton of money, so give us the money. That kind of, hiring thugs to steal money. So yeah, you can have a job making crank phone calls to people, trying to trick them into giving you money. You can be incentivized to do all kinds of work. And the people controlling all these digits that are, these checks, this money that the workers are after, are all these greedy bastards. And so they're trying to figure out schemes to get the workers to do shit that they can make a profit off of. They're not worried about that value thing. They're just worried about getting as much value out of the worker, giving him as little food as possible and selling what he produces for as much as possible. And so what gets incentivized is all kinds of schemes. It's more profitable to hire somebody to lie and cheat than it is to hire somebody to do some kind of necessary service for humanity. And obviously as workers get poorer and poorer, they have less ability to buy anything. So you can't make a profit. They're getting harder and harder to make a profit off of. You can't steal their money if they don't have any money. So the rackets start getting for people that do have money. So the whole economy starts to be driven towards pulling money out of the rich rather than giving services to the poor, or the middle class, as you might say. So eventually you're just taking care of the infrastructure the rich live on, because they're the only ones that have money. So you're only selling stuff to them. And the infrastructure that keeps the poor alive, like a house and roads and bridges and all that kind of crap that poor people need, that kind of infrastructure gets weaker and more broken, because nobody's investing in it, because poor people don't have enough money to pay a high premium for it. You can't inflate the price. There's price limitations on how high the price can go for things like food. Once the price for food goes too high, there'll be no money to be made in producing food, and rich people won't invest in food anymore. They'll invest in food for rich people. You know, and that's the world you'll end up with. The food for rich people will be cheaper, food for poor people will be more expensive. Yeah. So anyway, this didn't turn out the way. I mean, I failed to do exactly what I wanted to do, which was to show the reining of the money down and how it is all resolved in the Fed. How the Fed takes all these fake pieces of stuff eventually and converts them into cash. And the only reason why our economy is getting away with what it has done, which is create a bunch of fake money that really can't be resolved into cash because it's not real stuff that it represents. It's promises that can't be kept. It's fake promises. It's like me lying to the bank, giving them fake gold, getting cash out, using the cash. There's a whole ton of that kind of crap that went on. So there's a whole sense that the economy is doing much better than it really is, because all of these digits are being created, but none of these digits have real stuff behind them. There's no real that went into the bank with real money coming out. They're bad checks. And they're bad checks in the form of these deeds, these stocks and bonds will never be worth what they say on them. And so when they finally have to be cashed out, when desperate times hit and everybody tries to sell their stock, the stock won't be worth the digits they've exchanged for. There'll be a huge number of bankruptcies, and all of a sudden all these digits will start dissolving. And yeah, it's going to be a big problem, because then no one's going to have any money to throw in front of the workers. So no one's going to be paying workers to work anymore, because no one's going to have any extra digits to throw in front of the workers. They're just going to have to, they're going to be scraping digits together just to pay their property taxes on their summer house. Or they're going to be scraping the money together to pay the loan they got from the bank. And so they're not going to have any extra money anymore to invest in workers doing work. Okay, that's part of it. Yeah, I didn't even get into the fact that when you make one of these IOUs, there's this maintenance fee to keep the IOU alive. And, you know, so that's what we call interest, is the maintenance of the IOU, the maintenance of the check. Keeping the check alive means it has to keep being paid interest. So it's like when a bond is created, it doesn't die because you pay a maintenance fee to keep it alive. The government pays interest to keep it alive so it doesn't get cashed out. And that's how there's a ton of paper that's in the form of this zombie money that's only being kept alive by feeding it a little bit of interest, a little bit of interest, a little bit of interest. But it can't ever be made into a living thing. It can ever be never converted into real cash. So it pays a maintenance fee to avoid the Fed. Okay, so pieces of paper that have a maintenance fee on them don't get transacted in the Fed. It's only the stuff that gets cashed out that gets transacted in the Fed. Yeah. Yeah. Alright, well, it's enough of a video. Yeah, like I just didn't quite, like I said, I had a better vision of it in my head, and it's, you know, this has good elements in it, but it's just not quite there as a real coherent drawing of exactly how the system works. But there is a system, and it's a delusion, though, to think that the system is coherent to solid mechanisms that can be sustainable. The system has oversold the pie. The goods can't be delivered in the future, and when they can't be delivered in the future, it means a ton of people who think they have wealth digits to spend won't have wealth digits to spend. They won't be able to incentivize work, and work will cease, and then employment ceases, and then therefore people can't buy anything, and then more work stops because no one can make a profit anymore. The margin of profit will shrink, and there will be no investment in each other anymore, because everybody will be unemployed and incapable of investing in each other. We'll all be trying to save ourselves, and in that process we will be drowning each other. That's the kind of chaos. There'll be one lifeboat, and there'll be too many people trying to get in it. That's probably a good metaphor. So that's sort of the system. The lifeboat is the cash, okay, and if you destroy the value of the cash, if you destroy the integrity of the cash, drill holes in it through inflation, it won't be able to carry as many people, that kind of thing. So as cash gets weaker, the number of people that can ride on it gets smaller. Yeah, and your world crumbles, and glub glub, drown drown. And that's where we're heading. And I didn't even get into the trillions of dollars the Fed artificially put into the reserve accounts. That's entirely fake money just to elevate the stock market. And the elevation of the stock market will have to be taken away. They will have to suck that air back out again. And when that air is sucked back out again, the market will crash dramatically. And so they're going to stop QE in the fall. I think we'll see a dramatic crash then. But the ultimate crash is going to happen when the banks need the money that's in the reserve accounts, and they start having to print money to pay the money back to the banks that they borrowed from the banks. And it will be the printing of the money. Once they start printing real cash, that's when everything crumbles, because no one will be being paid back in real money. Any debt you have, the debtor, the holder of your debt, is only going to be paid in money that's worth half as much as the money they gave you. And so they're going to incur huge losses in real cash because of the lack of value of the cash. And that will create huge defaults, because there won't be real value to the money anymore. It'll only be worth 50 cents on a dollar, and then 25 cents on a dollar, then 10 cents on a dollar. And as that declines, as the bankruptcies increase, the necessity of the government to print money will become more and more urgent, to keep the respirators going at the hospital, and to keep the subways running, and the farmers farming. All of those things are going to have to keep running. We're going to still need electricity. We're still going to need water. We're still going to need all these basic services. There's not going to be any money to pay for it. The government's going to start printing it. And it's over. Big trouble. So anyway, enough video. Try again next time. So I just keep trying. I mean, it's like I said, it's getting closer. I just didn't get it quite there. I have to engineer it ahead of time, and I just don't have the time. But anyway, it's okay.